2, 3, go. So I'm joined today by Vivienne Murtagh, who is a supervisor and trauma therapist for us here in Asset Ireland. And in the next 10 minutes, we're going to look at one topic: what is trauma? So Vivienne, do you want to share a little bit about what comes to your mind when I ask that one question? What is trauma?
What comes to my mind is that up until about 1970, there wasn't really a proper definition of trauma when Peter Levine started his work. And Peter Levine would be like one of the eminent men in trauma. And just after that, then PTSD came in. And Judith Herman, if Peter Levine's eminent, Judith Herman is the mother of trauma, I would say. She works in Harvard and she's still working on all of this. She's working at the moment with trauma and violence in women. And her definition is long, but I'll read it. It says, trauma impedes people both to withdraw from close relationships and to seek them desperately. The profound disruption in basic trust, the common feelings of shame, which I love that she includes shame, guilt and inferiority, and the need to avoid members of the trauma that might be found in social life, all foster withdrawal from close relationships. But the terror of the traumatic event intensifies the need for protective attachments. The traumatized person therefore frequently it alternates between isolation and anxious clinging to others. So in there you see ambivalent and avoidant attachment styles. And we'll go on to a very small definition later, but you can see within trauma, there's a lot of attachment. And I think we have seen the outworking of trauma in COVID, where there has been broken attachment, where there has been no connection, which is, we know that we need connection more than we need connection. I think it was Bowlby said we need connection more than we need food. And another definition, if I can get to this one, is by Jack Donnellan. And he says trauma is contagious and the contagion is likely to be insidious. All who come in contact with it can come away marked, including victim families and progeny, observers, bystander witnesses, advocates, researchers, and yes, perpetrators. And I just find in the context of COVID, perpetrator is a really interesting piece because the perpetrator here is not localized, can't find it, it's outside, and it's invisible. But it's like a monster that has been roaming around, getting us to hide in our houses. Now we're hoping that that monster who we couldn't see has been and was on the loose has been and gone or going. So I just think it's interesting that Jack Donnellan includes perpetrator, and for us the perpetrator is invisible, and that's how it's been. And another definition is one I think which we spoke about before, Bruce Lipton's little concise one. All trauma is broken connection. And I suppose the one that I would favour most at the moment in this context of where we are and what we're coming out of is a definition, I don't know where it's from, is alone and scared equals trauma. And so many people have been alone and so many people have been scared of the virus, scared of other people having the virus, and scared of the traumatic images that we've seen of, I've seen it, we've known it in acid, the images of funerals where you can't connect. I've watched funerals of friends online, and those images are they're fairly to the forefront of our minds at the moment. So that's alone and scared. I think they're the definitions that I would have.
There was in the definition of trauma is disconnection. I think you made a point before to me that in COVID-19, it was those we have some of the deepest connections with that we associate with safety, that is the elderly, grandparents, were those we had to keep most distance from. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
About broken connection?
And how in COVID-19 it was linked so much to those we associate so much with safety.
Yeah, well, if just that whole idea that we need connection more than we need food. Now we know that from babies. Babies, they ingest at the beginning, but really by 6 months, all they want is soft voice, connection, touch, prosody. And grandparents offer that to children. The gentle voice, the hug, and all of that is gone from both sides. And I think there's trauma there, and I don't know when that will be processed, because we can't process trauma if the trauma isn't over. And I think that's a really important thing. We have to be safe now in order to resolve the past. So we can't take any of those people that we know and get them vulnerable and then send them back into an unsafe world. So we'll be sitting with that the trauma of that broken connection for a very long time. I would imagine till we feel safe, and we're not feeling safe just yet. Does that answer that?
Yes. There's one more definition I think that maybe has a context right now in COVID-19. Currently, we're at a stage of reopening or re-entering, and lots of the activities we're slowly returning to. And it's the definition, and I wonder if you can remind us of trauma as incompleteness, that something isn't completed. And we're getting to complete some activities now that we couldn't before, and yet so much still is left incomplete. Could you tell us a little bit more about that understanding of trauma?
Murtagh lived from 1859 to 1947, so he's been around in the 20th century. He says that patients affected by traumatic memory have not been able to perform any actions characteristics of the stage of triumph. He's saying we need a triumphant finish to things, and that's when. So it's not, trauma is not even what happens; it's the fear of what can happen, and it's something not being completed. And there's a whole big piece around the vagal nerve, which we're not going to now, but we need to complete something. I'll give you an example of an uncompleted or a completed act of trauma, not trauma, but just last night I was sitting and everyone was quiet. Everybody was in bed. Oh, there's only other one person in bed in this house. And I was looking into my conservatory and a big shadow came over the conservatory. This was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. And what happened was that my stomach clenched, which is one of the things that happens in trauma. And so it's the evolutionary vertebrae in reverse. I started in my tummy, then it amplified and went into my chest, and then it went into my head. And I think what they say is like a 13th billionth of a second. And I thought, there's somebody in the house. And I froze. And then I got up, so I worked my way up through my system, and I went out, and it was my cat under a light, and the light was throwing big shadow. But if I had stayed there frozen, I would not have completed the trauma. So trauma always needs movement. It needed me to get up. It needed me to move. It needed me to do something. So there's going to be a lot of incompleted actions. We think we're going back to work, then we're not. We think we can meet with a group, then we're not. And I think Piaget's definition of that we need something that's characteristic of a stage of triumph fits there. Yes, we're going back to work, but we don't know that.
Thanks, Vivienne. And I know that in our current stage that we're at, triumph seems like the last thing. It seems so far away, that complete picture of triumph, when there's so much uncertainty still of the next stage, is something that's, I guess, all around us. It's everywhere. So I wonder, just as we finish off now, any last thoughts about how these definitions of trauma, what they mean for where we're at right now, and maybe which of them you think will we need to focus on in the next little while?
I think, and there's a whole big piece here, but I think we need to concentrate on not looking at the trauma. We can look at, when will this Godzilla leave? What will the economy look like? Will I still have a job? Will my pension still be secure? If we go down that route, that's not helpful. We need to be still. We need to be calm. We need to be compassionate to ourselves. We need to be kind. We need to breathe. We need to walk. We need to move. We need to dance. We need to sing. We need to smile. We need to do all those things that help our social engagement system, that calm our vagal nerve. Because if we don't, our immune system will not function, and we don't want to get this virus or another virus. So we need to be looking after our immune system, and our immune system needs us to support it by not going down the route of, where is this Godzilla at the moment, and is it coming back, or what will the future be like? So we need to get into the moment. We need to practice mindfulness. We need to practice breathing. we'll talk about this again. We need to, I suppose I'll just finish this by, and I think you know this one, we need to have this tip, which is a tip. If we feel overwhelmed, do something about our temperature. Primarily, plunge your head into the freezer, or put cold water over your wrists, or go and jump in the sea, or have a cold shower. And that helps with the trauma, or the tightening in the gut. It also helps with our immune system. The I is do a little bit of intense exercise, jumping jacks. And P is pace your breathing. And maybe if we talk again, we'll do a bit of pace breathing together.
Great. Thanks so much, Vivienne. Yeah, next time we'll have a little look at some trauma detail. And but thanks for those reflections.